Welcome to final part. Racy awoke at her usual time on Saturday morning, and excused herself to the bathroom. She had stayed up very late the previous night, awaiting the return of her best friend. When it had become clear that Daphne was not returning from her rendezvous with Harry, Tracy happily went to bed. Pleased with herself. She was supposed to be meeting with Ron and going to breakfast. Oh, Ron Weasley. That redhead was incredibly cute. He was just the right mix of strong, brave, and clueless. Tracy had never thought about Ron much before she'd gotten to know him. She usually liked boys a little more mature than Ron was, but at the same time, none of those boys ever made her laugh like Ron did. Ever since Hermione had given her blessing, Tracy had ramped up her flirtatious advances. She loved how the boy jumped whenever she would grab his leg, or how red his face got when she would bat her eyes at him. There was another side to Ron that she was only now discovering. They had had 2 conversations, that were serious talks. Ron was very guarded, keeping his feelings locked inside, but on the 2 occasions Tracy had the chance to talk to him alone, he had opened up, only a tiny bit. But enough for Tracy to see something she didn't think anyone else saw. Ron was hurting right now. She knew how Hermione was feeling over what was happening, but Ron always had a brave face on. But Tracy had seen the truth recently. Ron was afraid, possibly more afraid than he'd ever been, and that fear was for his best friend. It had touched Tracy deeply, and it had changed her feelings for Ron dramatically. He was no longer just fun to flirt with, he was someone who could be worth her heart. She needed to explore this a bit more, but there was definitely something special going on there. Finishing up her morning regime, she padded back into the dorm and began dressing. Pansy and Millie were long gone. Pansy had taken up jogging and had forced poor Millie into accompanying her. It had done the larger girl some good, as she had lost 20 pounds because of it, but Tracy knew that she just hated going with Pansy. Suddenly, the door opened, then shut. Tracy looked a little puzzled, until Daphne's head appeared, a bright smile on her face. "Harry's cloak?" she asked. Daphne smiled, her eyes unfocused and far away. The blonde whipped off the cloak, revealing the green nightie Tracy had loaned her the previous night. Daphne lay the cloak down neatly on her bed, humming the entire time. "So?" Tracy grinned. Daphne sat lightly on her own bed, her eyes still distant, a funny grin on her face. "Amazing," she whispered. "Amazing, huh?" Tracy giggled lightly. "No. Amazing doesn't quite cover it. I don't know if there are words for it." Daphne grinned goofily. "Wow" was all Tracy could say. "Honestly, I'm surprised I could walk this morning. After the 3rd time, I couldn't even feel my legs anymore. 3 times. Tracy gawked. "And once this morning. What have I done?" Tracy bemused, shaking her head and rubbing her temples. "Grinning the whole time. I have to hurry. We're having breakfast, and then we're going to spend the rest of the day together. All of us, so finish getting ready," Daphne ordered as she hurried off to the bathroom to shower. "If that's love," Tracy grinned, as she watched her best friend skip off. "Then sign me up. I want some of that for myself." She fell back on her bed and began picturing a romantic tryst with a very handsome redhead Gryffindor. Severus Snape was looking over the final plans for that evening's events at Grimmauld Place. Tonight could be the night that finally ended the war at last. The information had leaked that Harry Potter was to be escorted to Diagon Alley for meeting with the goblins. The information also included contents of the prophecy, basically to make Lord Voldemort believe he had to kill Harry himself. Snape had worked hard to make his master believe in what he had told him, even suffering the torture curse for his inability to retrieve the information sooner. Snape and Dumbledore had concocted the story that Harry had been able to slip away because only Voldemort would be able to deal with the boy, and that it would be best if the Dark Lord himself went to face the boy alone, relying on no one to ensnare the boy. This had worked because it had inflated the Dark Lord's ego by placing blame on his followers. Things had progressed rather quickly. Members of the Order would be in place along the rooftops where they would have a clear line of sight. The standing order was to kill. Not capture, bind or stun, but kill, on sight. Many of the Order members were there rechecking details. Everything looked sound, and with a bit of luck, they would all return to Hogwarts, or headquarters with reason to celebrate. Then, when the school year finished, and students returned home safely, Severus Snape would submit his resignation and retire. But first, he had to make through tonight. Severus, came a rumbling bass voice. Kingsley, come in. Is everything in place? Snape asked of the dark-skinned Auror. It is. The ministry will be empty, and we have people setting up in London as we speak. We're expecting a full attack. Yes, I agree. The Dark Lord will not come alone as we hope, he's too arrogant for that. He'll want an audience. Are you ready? To play Potter? Yes. So long as I don't have to say anything, it should fool him long enough to do what we need to. Remember, shoot to kill. He won't be taken alive. Snape said, eyeing the taller man seriously. Everyone knows their jobs. I hope this plan of yours works, and it makes me wonder why Dumbledore never tried something similar. You know as well as I do. He believes a war can be won without bloodshed. His ideals have gotten too many killed. If we pull this off, we could finally be free of terror. Voldemort must die tonight. I understand. When will I be getting Potter's hair for the potion? I have them here. Snape said, reaching into a pocket and extracting a vial containing several black hairs. He was quite reluctant to give them up. Snape commented. I would be surprised if he wasn't. He's quite noble. Kingsley grinned. That he is. Snape mumbled sourly. Good luck, Severus. I hope you succeed with your plan. Snape merely nodded as Kingsley left him alone. McGonagall stepped in as the tall Auror left. Is everything ready? She asked hesitantly. As ready as we can be. You're worried? She said. Snape looked up from the table and regarded his colleague. I don't know why, but something doesn't feel right. I've looked over our plan again and again, and it doesn't have a single flaw. There are so many people in hiding, ready to take him down, that I will be surprised if there is anything left of his body. With all of that happening, taking Potter to the Vale should be simple. Yet, I have this feeling that something is going to go wrong. The best laid plans almost never do. Our focus must be on Harry. Leave you-know-who to Kingsley and the others. When we finish our task, then we can worry about the others. You're right, of course. Did you see Potter before you came here? I did. He was enjoying breakfast with his friends. No doubt they will spend the majority of the day together. McGonagall said, a bit misty-eyed. I also spoke with Albus. He begged me to reconsider this course of action. He is so sure he's right. I just pray he doesn't try to interfere in some way. This may be our only chance at this, and I do not like the thought of what will happen if we fail. Snape grimaced. You need to try to remain calm. McGonagall warned. I'm fine. I think we should return to Hogwarts. We must at least appear to be going about our days as normal. McGonagall nodded and left the room. Snape stood up and glanced down at all the notes he'd been reviewing. They were close to the end now, and yet, he still felt impending doom hanging over him. He knew in his heart something was wrong, but he had no idea what it could be. It was only a feeling, a tingling in his gut. But it was enough to give him pause. If only I could be absolutely sure about all of this. He thought. Harry had spent one of the best days of his life with his friends. He was joined by people who meant the most to him. Daphne was there, always smiling so gently, her love for him so strong in her gaze. Hermione and Neville were there, sharing nervous glances, and holding hands. Harry could see something very special beginning to blossom between the two of them, even if they had no idea it was happening. Harry wondered if this was how Tracy saw the world. Tracy was there too, alongside Ron, keeping them all entertained by flirting madly with the naive boy. A couple of times, Ron had returned the advances, only to be embarrassed when it encouraged Tracy to become a little more frisky. Ginny and Dean had joined them during the morning. Harry had asked them to join them, and after breakfast, most of them went flying. Harry felt so free up in the air, chasing his friends, and pulling off stunts that had made him one of the greatest seekers Hogwarts had ever known. Only Daphne and Hermione had remained grounded, laughing and cheering the antics of their friends. They had lunch on the grounds, thanks to Dobby, and then they had just talked and laughed and carried on like teenagers without a care in the world. It was what Harry had always longed for. To be normal. To spend time with friends without the weight of the world on his shoulders. Throughout the day, Daphne and Harry had shared kisses and significant looks. He clutched her hand as they walked around the lake. And while they sat against boulders watching the giant squid. Ginny and Dean had bade them all goodbye at dinner while the rest of them went to see Hagrid, who was overjoyed at the company. He served up tea and his rock cakes, which Tracy nearly chipped a tooth on, even though Ron had tried to warn her. At 7 p.m., Hagrid escorted the students down to the front gates of the school. The 6 of them waited to be joined by the adults who were to escort them to the ministry. They were all stone silent, unsure of what they could say at the moment. Harry looked at each of them, glad that they had all agreed to come with him, even Neville, who had no clue where they were going or why, but had agreed just the same. Harry was never more thankful in his life to be surrounded by such faithful friends. He could feel his heart bursting with emotion as he looked at each one of them, sharing unspoken sentiments. "You're all here." Harry looked and smiled as Remus Lupin sauntered through the gates escorted by Tonks, who was clinging to his arm. Tonks looked as chipper as she normally did, while Remus looked more reserved. "Hello, Remus," Harry said, his throat closing with his emotion. Remus gave a sad smile and enveloped the boy in a warm hug. Harry knew that Remus had learned what they were going to do from McGonagall, as he had asked her to make sure he was there, but he had not spoken to Remus himself. "You're very brave, Harry. Your mother and father would be very proud of you," Remus whispered, feeling the boy trembling in his arms. "I'm so scared," Harry whispered back, causing Remus to tear up. "It's okay to be frightened. You're human after all. But it will all be okay. You'll see. No matter what happens, it will all be okay in the end." Harry pulled back from his father's friend and smiled thankfully at the man who'd once been his professor. His hand quickly found that of Daphne's and he pulled her close to him. Daphne wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling him tremble. Her heart ached for him, and for what was about to happen. "Good, everyone is here," Snape said in a commanding voice as he and McGonagall approached them. "Well, let's get on with it." And with that, the group began walking off the grounds, with Harry sparing one last look at the castle that he had considered his home for the last 6 years. Silently, he bade it one final goodbye. They trudged down the path towards Hogsmeade in the light of the setting sun, with Hagrid leading the way. 2 by 2 they went. Hermione and Neville walked behind Hagrid, holding hands. Remus and Tonks followed, her arms looped through his, both staring at the ground as they walk. Ron and Tracy were behind them. Occasionally, Tracy would reach out and rub Ron's back comfortingly, which caused him to give her a look of thanks, to which Tracy would smile back. Trying to give the redhead encouragement. Daphne and Harry followed, arms around each other's waist. Daphne was trying her damnedest not to start crying. She was angry, and frightened, and 1,000 other things. She just wanted to keep Harry close as long as possible. For all she knew, this might be the very last moments she would ever have with the black-haired boy. Snape and McGonagall brought up the rear, each watching out vigilantly for anything that was out of place. Hagrid led them to the Hogshead pub, where he opened the door and let the group inside. The bartender looked up sourly as McGonagall tossed a small pouch on the bar, and had a whispered conversation with the grungy-looking man. Snape went to the fire and pulled a bag of Floo powder out of his waistcoat pocket. Each of you take a pinch. We're going to the Ministry of Magic lobby. Hagrid went first, having to bend almost in half to fit in the fireplace. Remus and Tonks followed, and then McGonagall. One by one the students went through until finally, Snape himself joined them. It was very quiet at the Ministry. 4 of the 16s were reminded of a night not so long ago, when they had been in that very room. Somehow, it doesn't seem as eerie this time. Ron commented. No. It doesn't, Neville agreed. This way. Snape said, leading the troop now, keeping his eyes open for any signs of life. Though most of them already knew the way, they followed obediently. Harry saw his friends all glancing at him, all of them wanting to say something, but seemingly unable to speak. The walk was a short one, and they all entered the round room with the many doors. Once they were all inside, and the door was shut, the room spun just as Harry remembered. When it had stopped, however, Snape called out for the Veil Room, and a door to his right opened up. The room was exactly as he remembered it. A small auditorium with a raised platform and a large stone arch with a curtain that seemed to be moving from an unfelt breeze. Harry closed his eyes and saw his godfather's face as he fell through that very curtain a year ago. Come on, Harry. Daphne whispered. We're almost done. We'll be able to go back to Hogwarts in just a few minutes. Harry nodded, and he led the entire group down to the raised platform. They all stood, staring at the arch for a few moments before anyone spoke. What are we doing here? It's a really long story, Neville. Harry said softly. When it's all over, someone will explain it to you. I just hope I get to be there when they do. You will be. Hermione said forcefully, though her eyes were spilling tears. You have to. My own. Harry said as he engulfed her in a tight embrace. You've never, ever stopped believing in me, even when you knew I was off my rocker. You tried to prevent me from making a huge mistake, and yet you stood by me as I did it anyway. Hermione began to sob now, causing others to follow suit. Ron looked away to prevent himself from crying, even biting his lip. Neville stared in confusion, though on some level, he knew what was happening. I don't want you to do it. What if I'm wrong? I couldn't find anything to support my theory. I don't want you to go. Hermione begged. Hermione, if it were anyone else, I never would have agreed to this. But you're the smartest witch in an age, and you've never let me down before. I love you, you know that, right? Hermione tried to smile as she nodded, but her sorrow overwhelmed her, and she clutched him tightly again. Harry kissed her cheek, and thanked her for being his friend. Hermione mumbled something, but Harry had no idea what she said. After a few moments Harry was able to tear himself from Hermione's grip. He offered his hand to Neville, who took it firmly. I'm sorry that I never tried to be a better friend to you. You are one of the bravest men I've ever had the privilege to know. Neville pulled Harry in and gave him a firm hug, before releasing him. Harry smiled and patted Neville's shoulder heartily, and then turned to Remus. "You're just going to take a walk?" Remus said. "Whatever happens, know that I'll look out for this lot. Thank you, for all you've done for me over the years." "I wish we'd met sooner," Harry said simply. Remus nodded, looking proudly at the boy he felt he'd only just begun getting to know. "I'm very proud of you." They stood looking at each other for another moment before they embraced each other again. Harry heard Tonks choking back her own tears as she watched this exchange. When Harry and Remus broke apart, she found herself engulfed by Remus. "Take care of him, won't you?" Harry smiled sadly. Tonks could only nod. "Tracy, I want to thank you," Harry said. Tracy held her hand to her mouth, trying desperately to stop her own emotions from breaking through. Her eyes were misty now, and she felt herself shaking. "I know we haven't been friends very long. But you've made me laugh harder in that short time than I have my entire life." Harry pulled her in for a warm hug and whispered, "Ron's a little slow. But I know that you and he will be very happy together. You just concentrate on coming through that thing, okay? It took a lot of work to get you and Daphne together, and I have the perfect dress picked out for your wedding." She smiled, tears falling from her eyes. With one last squeeze, Tracy let him go. "Mr. Potter." "Harry. I have never been prouder of any student I have ever known. You have done things that wizards twice your age could never dream of accomplishing. You are a true Gryffindor." Minerva McGonagall gave a rare heartfelt smile, and Harry shook her hand. And was surprised to find himself being hugged by the usually stoic Transfiguration teacher. "I knew when I met ye all those years ago, ye were going to do great things, Harry," Hagrid said, wiping his huge eyes. "Every year ye got into trouble, and ye always came out of it all right. This is no different, ye here. Ye do what ye gotta do, and ye come back to us." Harry smiled as he allowed Hagrid to embrace him. Harry couldn't help but smile as he remembered when he first met Hagrid, that night in the little shack on the sea. How he had frightened the Dursleys and gave Dudley a curly pig's tail. Hagrid finally let go of Harry and gave him a strong pat on the back. Nearly knocked the skinny teen to the ground. That left only 3 people which to say farewell to. "Ron?" Harry asked. Ron had kept his eyes away from all the display. Blood was coming from his lip where he'd been biting it to keep himself calm, but Harry and the others could see it wasn't working. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was trembling violently. "I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet, mate," Ron choked out. "I can't do it." "I know. I'm not ready, either." "Remember what you promised me." "You don't have to remind me," Ron said softly, finally looking into his best friend's eyes. "I haven't always been the best friend, but you never gave up on me, and I'm not going to give up on you. You faced dragons, dementors, and you know Voldemort. You can beat this." Then, Ron did something Harry had never expected, or witnessed. Ron lunged out and hugged Harry tightly. Harry returned the embrace tightly. Ron was more than his best friend. He was a brother. Harry couldn't even imagine what his life could have been had Ron sat in another compartment on the train. "I'll be waiting for you on the other side," Ron finally said as he released Harry, patting his shoulder, and wiping his eyes angrily. "Take care of yourself, mate," Harry said as he pulled away from Ron. They shared another look, both communicating things only best friends could share through a simple look. Harry didn't miss Tracy stepping up beside Ron and putting a hand on his shoulder. "Potter, I'd like a word," Snape said, making Harry and everyone else turn in astonishment. Harry recovered from his shock and followed the teacher who had been the bane of his existence for years. Snape turned and stared at Harry for a long moment. Before he spoke, "You know that I hated your father, we were bitter rivals all through school, but I want you to know that I never wished for him to die. Even after he married the only woman I ever loved." Harry reeled at this revelation. Snape held Harry's gaze, never wavering. "I should have told you this a long time ago, but it was my cross to bear, not yours. You were in love with my mother." Harry whispered. "Very much. I will not ask your forgiveness for the way I've treated you. I just wish you know that I never hated you, but what you represented to me." Snape said stiffly. "You've been a right bastard to me, all these years. But in the last few months, you went out of your way to try and train men, and to protect me. We'll never be friends, but at least I can say with honesty that you've earned my respect, sir." Snape nodded slowly, and offered his hand. "You've earned mine as well, Harry." Harry turned to see his friends watching him, and he caught the eyes of the only person left he hadn't said anything to. She held out her hand for him, and he closed the gap between them, pulling her close to him. Together they stepped onto the platform. Harry could hear the distant whispers of 1,000 voices just beyond the lightly moving curtain. He felt Daphne's arms squeeze his waist, and he looked into her beautiful brown eyes. Again he kissed her, softly, hoping she could feel his love in that simple gesture. Daphne sniffled as they broke the kiss. She held a hand to his cheek, straining to clear her throat so she could tell him everything she wanted him to remember. To tell him one last time that she truly loved him. Expelliarmus. Wands flew in every direction, and Harry suddenly felt his body stiffen. He fell into Daphne, whose body had also become like stone. Everyone suddenly found themselves unable to move at all. Then the laughter began. A high, cold cackle that chilled Harry's spine. "How touching. I don't know where to begin." Lord Voldemort smiled malevolently as he descended into the auditorium. "It does appear that I have arrived just in time. I am truly sorry, but I simply cannot allow you to kill yourself, Harry. A very helpful little bird has told me that I must kill you myself, or I myself could die. And I simply cannot allow that." Voldemort levitated Harry's body and placed it before himself. He then set about levitating Harry's friends so they could watch what he was preparing to do, maneuvering Snape last. "Severus, you have disappointed me. You made me believe that Harry would be in Diagon Alley. Imagine my dismay to learn that it was you, one of my most trusted lieutenants who had been a spy to the Order of the Phoenix all the years. You lied to me, misled me. You betrayed me." Voldemort hissed, getting right in front of Snape, who glared angrily back at the skeletal ghost of a wizard. "You shall all die here tonight. But not before you witness the end of your savior." "Harry, how many times have we been here? Each time you managed to slip out of my grasp. But not this time. Not tonight. Tonight. You die." Voldemort raised his wand, preparing to strike down his mortal foe. Harry saw the hate in those crimson eyes, and the look of rapture on Voldemort's face as he began to swing his arm down. In that moment, time slowed to a crawl. Harry looked past Voldemort to Daphne. Her eyes wide, her face frozen from the Dark Lord's spell. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her on final time, to tell her what she had meant to him. Avada. Avada Kedavra. The green light shot out, and Voldemort only just stepped out of the way. He turned to find Snape squaring off against him, Harry's wand in his hand. "How? I wished to free myself. To kill you, for what you did to Lily Evans. For what you made me do. That's how wandless magic works. I can't let you live any longer." Snape howled. " I'm going to enjoy this." Voldemort sneered. The two combatants began to circle, staring hard at one another, preparing to end the other's life. Voldemort struck first with a very powerful blast of red light, which Snape deftly sidestepped before returning with a slash of his own wand. Voldemort raised a shield which glowed hotly as Snape's spell struck. More spells were traded, and Harry could only watch in horror as spells crashed all around his friends. Then something happened to give Harry hope. McGonagall and Remus were moving, scrambling for wands. Snape had freed them while he was circling the Dark Lord. McGonagall found her own, and went to free Harry's friends, while Remus freed Tonks and Hagrid, who immediately joined the fight. Voldemort was undeterred by the changing odds. He blasted Hagrid with a spell which knocked the half-giant off his foot and crashing into a stone wall, knocking him unconscious. Tonks proved to be more agile, and quite swift on her feet. And the Dark Lord had real trouble trying to hit the meddlesome Auror. Harry suddenly found himself falling to the floor in a heap as he was released from the body bind spell. When he looked, he saw a thin black wand right in front of his nose, and he quickly seized it. "Potter, this way." McGonagall was waving for him to follow her, but he had enough of running. He'd come here to die tonight, but he was not going until he knew his friends would be safe, and for that to happen, he had to put an end to the war. "Tom." Voldemort turned his sinister red eyes to Harry, who was holding up the wand he'd found, staring back at the reason for his horrid life. "Potter." Voldemort hissed. He lunged, sending 3 blasts of purple light right at Harry's chest. Harry spun and dove out of the way, firing 2 stunners at the Dark Lord, who laughed maniacally. His laughter faded when a bludgeoning curse impacted his shoulder. Voldemort turned to see an enraged blonde with her wand aimed right at his head. "You dare!" "We all do!" Ron cried as he raised his own wand. Harry turned and saw all of his friends had found their wands and were now aiming them at the Dark Lord. None of them looked afraid anymore. They were all staring coldly at the husk of a man who'd tried to kill the one person they all loved. "I cannot be killed." Voldemort chuckled. "If you're referring to the safety of your Horcruxes." "Forget it." Harry smiled. "They're all gone." "You lie." Voldemort spun to stared angrily at Harry. "No, he isn't," Snape remarked coolly. "The snake that Pettigrew killed, Nagini. I made him do that. I also found out where you hid the cup. We destroyed the others, the ring, the tiara, and the locket." Hermione shouted. "They're all gone. And Lucius Malfoy gave us the diary." "There's nothing left, Tom," Harry said. "So what?" Voldemort bellowed. "I am still more powerful than any of you. But not stronger than all of us combined." Remus smiled. Voldemort's eyes opened wide and he suddenly looked frightened. He began to spin on his heel, knowing that he had to escape. "Now!" Snape shouted. The room filled with green light as the killing curse flew from every wand in the room. Voldemort was hit simultaneously by 10 spells. There was no time to scream, no time to blink. Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort died. Silence fell heavy on them all as they could only stare at the body of their enemy. Suddenly, Harry's scar burned, pulsing with pain. The agony was so great that it made his knees buckle and he fell to the floor. "Harry!" Daphne shouted, running to his side. "I need to go, now. Help me, please." He hissed through his pain, clutching his now bleeding forehead. Daphne hefted him to his feet and tighter they approached the veil. Tears streamed from her eyes as she kissed him soundly, holding him tightly. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you, too," he grimaced. Touching her cheek softly. He turned to look at his friends one last time, and then, turned around and stepped into the veil. It was warm, peaceful, bright. He stood on the top of a hill overlooking a picturesque valley. He turned about, taking in the scene of serenity, and felt only tranquility in it all. He had no worries, or qualms. Only bliss. Yet, he felt empty, hollow somehow, as if something was missing. He looked down at himself to find he was wearing light-colored pants and a crisp shirt, that felt soft against his skin. He looked at his hands and noticed they were clean. He looked closer at his left hand, the one that he knew had been scarred, but it was unmarred. This puzzled him, but he still felt no unease. Then he heard something that filled him with inexplicable joy. "We've been waiting for you." He turned and saw three people he knew, people that made his heart leap into his throat, though he didn't know why. He knew that he knew these people, but he couldn't remember who they were or where he knew them from. Still, he was overjoyed at the sight of them. It's all a little disorientating at first, but it'll pass. It's gone now, son. You're free now. The woman beautiful, with shimmering red hair falling over her shoulders. Her eyes were bright green and her smile soft and warm. She reached out and touched his cheek gently, looking proud. "Oh, how I've missed you." Her touch was like nothing he'd ever known, gentle, warm and full of love. He melted into her touch, feeling comfort like he'd never known, and it made him want to cry. The taller of the two men stepped up and held his shoulders, looking him over. His hair was messy and black, and he had an easy grin. He wore round glasses and his brown eyes sparkled in the sunlight. "You've become quite a man, and I couldn't be any prouder of you. You did well, son. You did so well. Never had a doubt, pup." The rather ragged-looking man grinned. His black hair was to his shoulders and he had a dark mustache. His voice was the most familiar of the three, and he felt comforted by it. His shirt was open and he had strange tattoos covering his torso. His eyes looked full of mischief, yet it wasn't frightening, instead it was welcome. And then it all came rushing back to him. He knew each of these people because he loved them all. Tears sprung to his eyes as he finally embraced his mother. She let out a cry of joy as she wrapped her son in a warm embrace, and kissed his cheeks. "Mum," he whispered. She held him a few more moments before pulling back to look at him. "Is it really over?" he asked, looking to his father, and Sirius. Both men nodded. Harry let out a howl of joy, and embraced his mother again. He then grabbed Sirius and his father and hugged them as well. The four of them laughed, and hugged one another over and over again in celebration at being reunited. "So what happens now?" Harry asked when he'd hugged everyone at least 3 times. At his question, the 3 adults' faces fell a bit. Harry looked to each of them, trying to discern what had caused the sudden shift in their moods. "When you crossed into this realm, the taint that was Voldemort was split from you. You don't remember it because it was very excruciating. It was decided that it should be us to come to you. But your friend was right, you were a very special case. Hermione should be very proud of herself." "How'd you know about that?" he asked, looking surprised. "We can see you, and your friends, Harry." James nodded. Harry followed his gaze and saw a large mirror that he knew hadn't been there before. Through it, he saw all his friends, as if frozen in time. "Why aren't they moving? Are they hurt?" Harry asked worriedly. "Time moves very differently here," James tried to explain. "Fact is, I'm not even sure if it exists at all." "I don't understand." Harry looked confused. "Nor do we." Sirius grinned. "James, we don't have much time," Lily reminded her husband, and James nodded. "Harry, listen to me. I know you have questions, and I wish we could answer them all right now, but we can't. Listen to me, son. You have been given a very rare gift, a second chance. It's time for you to use it. You have a family waiting for you. Again, Harry's father nodded toward the mirror. Harry followed his gaze again, and his heart pounded as he thought of Daphne, who looked to being crying. She truly loves you, Harry. Lily smiled, stepping up next to her only son. I know you love her as well, I can see it on your face even now. Harry allowed himself a small smile. It's time. Sirius said a bit sadly. You've done what you had to, now it's time to go live your life. Marry that girl, and make lots of little ones, and for the love of Merlin, be happy. There's a house just outside of Cordes-sur-Sille in France that you might like. It belonged to your great-grandfather, but with a little love, you could make it your own. Harry's father smiled. Oh, my son. I love you very much, and I am so proud of the man you've become. Lily said teary-eyed. It's time to return to her. To all of them. Go, live your life. Harry nodded, holding his mother tightly. Will I ever see you again? Harry asked, his eyes blurring from tears. Not until it's your time. James embraced his son one last time. Which better not be for a very long time. Sirius laughed. You've got some lost time to make up for. The three adults who Harry loved so much began to slowly walk backwards away from him. Remember that we love you. Lily waved. Tell Severus that we're sorry. Tell him he's a far better man than we gave him credit for. Sirius said. Goodbye, son. James saluted. Wait. How do I get back? You already know. Sirius grinned. Follow your heart. Lily said, blowing him one last kiss. I love you. Harry turned to stare into the mirror. He saw Daphne, standing just as she had been the whole time. She looked so beautiful, though she was suffering from a breaking heart. Harry's own heart gave a lurch at the thought of the pain he was causing her, and he reached out to touch the mirror. He jumped slightly when his hand became translucent. He rolled his eyes and shook his head. Of course it would be that simple, he thought. He had a deep breath and let it out slowly. With a last look over his shoulder at his mother, father, and Sirius, he stepped into the mirror. Harry! Daphne screamed as the boy fell to the ground. She ran to his side, and turned him onto his back. She gasped at the sight of him. He was clean, not a single drop of blood, and most noticeable was the fact that his scar, the mark that he'd been given so long ago, was gone. As if it had been wiped clean. Is he alive? Hermione asked, her voice shaking. Daphne felt his neck, fighting back a shiver at how white he looked, and felt a faint thump of his heartbeat. Tears began to fall again as she nodded. Harry! She said softly, running her hands through his hair. Harry, can you hear me? Come, child. Professor McGonagall said as she pushed her way to the limp form of her student. We'll get him back to Hogwarts. Hagrid, would you please? Hagrid nodded and scooped Harry's body up. Daphne walked beside the half-giant, clutching the hand of the man she loved, and they all left the auditorium, leaving only Severus Snape and the body of the fallen Dark Lord behind them. Snape watched them go, and then turned his gaze to the crumpled form of his former master's body. He took a long deep breath, letting it out slowly. Then, with a swish and flick, he levitated the body into the veil where it disappeared forever. Albus Dumbledore had just heard Kingsley Shacklebolt's report on what should have been the end of the war. The dark-skinned Auror had told the headmaster that they had waited for several hours, but nothing had happened. Dumbledore sighed at the news, and told Kingsley to gather everyone and return to headquarters. Obviously Lord Voldemort had smelled a trap. Kingsley sighed and agreed, then he had left the infirmary. Dumbledore was worried now. Snape had yet to return, and Dumbledore hoped that the defense teacher had not been killed. Worse yet, McGonagall and Hagrid had accompanied Snape in his errand. He rubbed the bridge of his nose in frustration, and then succumbed to another hacking coughing fit. His time was nearing, he knew, but he had to hold on, he had to know if his plan had worked. Dumbledore had to know if the Dark Lord was dead at last. His answer came crashing through the infirmary door. "Poppy!" Hagrid cried. "Poppy, we need yet." Dumbledore sat up in his bed and watched as Hagrid lay a body in a bed nearby. He was accompanied by Remus and Tonks. He began to worry until he saw McGonagall and Snape coming in the doorway to join the group gathered around the bed. "He won't wake up," Dumbledore heard a female voice say. "He's going to be okay. He has to be," another voice said, pleadingly. Dumbledore began coughing again, his entire body shaking badly. He looked up and caught Snape's black eyes. The former potions master glowered at him, then turned his attention to the body in the bed. After a moment, the sallow-skinned teacher stormed over to the headmaster's bed. "You told him," he said accusingly. "It had to be you. How did you find out?" "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Severus," Dumbledore lied. "It's over. You were wrong," Snape said simply. "Voldemort is dead, and Harry is still alive." "What?" "It worked, though not exactly as we had planned. You nearly got all those children killed in your fanaticism." Snape glowered. "The war is over. You can die now." Snape turned and returned to where the others were gathered, leaving Dumbledore gobsmacked. His heart sank with guilt as he realized what he'd just been told. Harry Potter was alive, and possibly without the Horcrux. Voldemort was dead at last. And worse yet, he had been wrong. He had nearly gotten an innocent child killed because he had truly believed he was infallible. He had nearly gotten 6 innocent children killed because his pride wouldn't let him believe a 16-year-old could be smarter than he was. Dumbledore fell back against his pillows, tears falling from his eyes. The war was over, at last. He had lived to see the end, though he had almost ruined it. His whole body quaked as he succumbed to another fit of coughing. "Albus!" Dumbledore looked up as the coughing subsided, and he saw his deputy headmistress sitting beside him. She reached out and took his hand, though her eyes were dark, and her face a mask of disappointment. "You betrayed us. I know why you did it. You just wanted to save us all. Severus' plan was sound. It would have ended, despite your meddling." "I'm sorry. I truly am," he wheezed. "I know. And perhaps one day, I will be able to forgive you. Perhaps even Harry will one day forgive you." "Oh, Albus. How could you?" "I just wanted." Minerva McGonagall felt Dumbledore grip her hand tightly as he fought for breath. His bright blue eyes searching for something unseen. He coughed again and his body stiffened. McGonagall felt tears coming to her eyes as she watched her friend. She knew he was fighting for another moment on this plane, but she also knew, death was impatient. "It's time, Albus," she whispered. "It's okay now. You need not worry about us any longer. We're free now, all of us. It's time for your next adventure." Her words seemed to comfort him as his body began to relax, and his breathing slowed. He could see beyond the great stone walls now. He could see great green fields, and brilliant blue sky. And there, waiting for him, was a woman he'd once known long ago, beckoning to him. He heard them, all around him. He knew their voices, and he desperately wanted to talk to them, to tell them he was there and that he loved them. Especially her. He missed her the most, and he wanted to hold her again, to kiss her. He fought against the darkness, reaching ever outward towards them. He needed them, and they wanted him, they all said so. He fought so hard, always reaching out trying to get to them. He wanted her, he had to be with her again. He loved her. Daphne. He called out. Daphne gripped his hand in hers, kissing it softly and holding it against her cheek. His eyes slowly opened, and she felt a wave of relief as he stared into her face. He smiled softly, turning his hand so he could caress her cheek. "You're a right brat, you know that," she said tearfully, smiling at him. "Don't you ever scare me like that again, do you understand? I promise." His voice was scratchy, and his throat horribly dry. He slowly sat up feeling stiff. "Hogwarts?" he asked her, and she nodded, pouring him a small cup of water, which he drank slowly. "We brought you back right away. You've been asleep for almost 2 weeks now." "2 weeks?" he asked astonished. "You were so weak. It was really scary. You practically fell through that archway in the blink of an eye, but—" "What?" he asked, offering his cup back to her for a refill. "When you stepped in, you were covered in blood from your scar. Snape said it was likely that when Voldemort died, the Horcrux in you became like a beacon or something, that's why it split open. But, when you fell out the other side, almost that same instant you stepped in, you clean, like you had just bathed, and your scar—" Harry was leaning forward now, very interested in what had happened. "It was gone," Daphne whispered, looking up at his forehead. Harry reached up to feel the spot his scar had resided and felt only smooth skin in its place. He began to get up, wanting to see for himself. "Calm down," Daphne urged, pushing him back into the bed. She whipped out her wand and conjured a small mirror, which he took gratefully. His eyes nearly popped out of his head at the sight. There was the faintest line, but otherwise, his lightning bolt scar had vanished. He set the mirror down, feeling overwhelmed. "It's really over then?" "Yes," Daphne said, trying to fight back another onset of tears. He smiled at her and gathered her into his arms, kissing her so passionately, her toes curled. She returned his kiss with equal emotion, and they held each other for a very long time, just enjoy the comfort of their closeness. A little while later, Harry's other friends came by and each of them welcomed him back. He learned that Dumbledore had died the night they had returned, and that he'd missed the funeral. He also learned that the war was over for good. Death Eaters were rounded up and taken away, many of them sentenced to death. Ron grinned as he presented that morning's Daily Prophet, with a large picture of Draco Malfoy being taken into custody. Harry allowed himself to laugh as he read the article a bit. Apparently Draco was trying to buy his way out of the country. The article guessed the Malfoy heir would be getting 25 years, as it was only possible to prove attempted murder. Maybe he'll get a cell next to his father. Ron chuckled. "What else have I missed?" Harry asked. "Just this." Tracy smiled, holding up her hand which was wrapped in Ron's. "When did that happen?" "Day after we got back." Ron blushed. "Hard to argue against a girl who kisses you." "Why would you want to?" Neville chuckled, and Hermione hit his arm playfully. The others laughed as well, and Harry reached out to Hermione. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes reflected so much more. Hermione nodded, her eyes misty. Anytime. Harry had to spend another few days in the infirmary under the watchful eye of the school matron, but was soon allowed to rejoin the rest of the school. Almost everyone noticed that his scar was gone, but many had heard variations of what had happened that night, so no one really bothered to ask. Harry also learned that Ron's family had come by to visit him, with Molly Weasley crying over him and begging for his forgiveness. Harry assured Ron that he bore no ill will towards his mother, and was looking forward to visiting during the summer. On the last day of school, the day before the students were set to depart, Harry wandered down to the dungeons, and knocked on the office door of his defense teacher. "Come." Harry opened the door slowly and stepped inside. "There's a rumor going around that you're retiring, sir," Harry said. "It's true," Snape said, looking up from his paperwork. "I've suffered the insolence of children far too long, and I think I've earned myself a rest." "Where will you go?" Harry wondered. "It's none of your concern. Suffice to say that it will be quiet, and free from annoying brats." His voice was harsh, as usual, but Harry could see a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sorry that I didn't do this sooner. I wondered if I dreamed it all, or if it doesn't matter. I have a message to give you." "Oh." Snape quirked an eyebrow. "Sirius says that they're sorry, and that you're a better man than they ever gave you credit for." Snape eyed the young man before him for a moment, before he found his voice again. "You saw them?" "Yeah. She didn't say anything, but I think she forgives you," Harry said softly. "I just thought you should know." Harry turned to leave, when Snape stopped him. "Thank you, Harry. I don't know if you're one for travel, but if you fancy a journey, there's a little place in France called Cordes-sur-Ciel. It's supposed to be quite nice. If you find yourself around that area, I'd like it if you came to tea." "I will consider it." Harry gave a small nod and left the man to his thoughts, feeling as if they had somehow finally come to an understanding. Harry knew in his heart he might well never see the man again in his life, and that was all right. Snape deserved his peace, he had earned it. 4 years later. "Are we late?" Hermione Longbottom asked as she stepped from the fireplace and into the kitchen of her friend's home. She was followed by her husband Neville, who hugged Daphne warmly. "You're just in time." Daphne smiled. "Would you mind?" "Of course not," Hermione said, shucking her coat and setting to work, chopping carrots. "The boys are outside, Neville, and there's butterbeer in the fridge." "Thanks." Neville smiled, grabbing a bottle and kissing his wife before heading outside to join his mates. "How's work been for you?" Daphne asked. "Busy. But, I think we're making progress. I'm waiting to see if I get a research grant. I know I'm close to isolating it. If I'm right, we might be able to actually keep werewolves lucid during their change. They'll be in control of themselves." "That's amazing." Daphne looked stunned. "I've no doubt you'll find it." "I can't believe how big you are." Hermione smiled as Daphne added a few more vegetables to Hermione's pile to be chopped. "Don't get me started. Harry says I looked beautiful, but I fell like a hippopotamus." "You just wait till you've got a bun in the oven, and see how pretty you feel," Daphne said, rubbing her pregnant belly lovingly. "Hermione's got a bun," Tracy said, coming in from the outdoors. "The natives are getting restless." Tracy hugged Hermione from behind, and reached past to steal a radish. "You're as bass, Neville." Hermione chuckled. "If they're so hungry, they can all get in here and help," Daphne said firmly. "Fine, we're here." Ron grinned, kissing Hermione's cheek in greeting. "How are you, Ron?" Hermione asked. Good. Training's about to start up again, so I'll be really busy. But you love it and you know it. Tracy smiled, patting his cheek, kissing him smartly. This your third season now? Neville asked. Yeah, second season I'll be starting, though. Ron nodded. The Cannons did good by snatching you up. They've been having really good years since you joined the team. Neville remarked. And Ginny? Hermione asked. Excited. The wedding should be good. Still can't believe my baby sister's getting married. And to Colin Creevy. Yeah, who saw that coming? Neville asked, reaching out to steal a bit of carrot his wife had just cut. Hey, just because we're not at home does not mean I won't cut your fingers off. She smacked at his arm, then turned back to Ron and Tracy. When are you two going to get married? Who says we aren't? Tracy flashed a wicked smile, and held up her finger. What? When? Why didn't you invite us? Hermione shouted. It just sort of happened. Ron blushed. One of those things. You know, you're traveling, you think, hey, wouldn't it be fun, and then you're getting screamed at by your mother for doing it without her there to see it. By the way, you all need to go to Las Vegas. It is amazing. Tracy added, hugging her new husband tightly. Did you know? Hermione glared at Daphne, who held her hands up. I only found out 2 days ago. Daphne answered. Really low, Weasley. I wanted to go to your bachelor party. Neville smirked. Not after the stories I heard about Harry's party. Hermione shot her husband a death look. Speaking of, where is my husband? I'm here. Harry stood in the doorway, simply watching his friends. He smiled at his wife as she embraced him, and fought past her engorged belly to kiss him. I swear if this is twins, I will hex you until you can't sit down properly. You told me you wanted a big family. Harry grinned, hugging her tightly. One at a time, Potter. It feels like there's a whole Quidditch team in there. You didn't seem to mind when we were making the roster. Daphne punched him in the arm hard. You're pushing it, buddy. If you're not careful, I may never let you see me naked again. Don't you dare threaten me, he grinned, embracing her again. He kissed her lips softly. I love you. I love you, too. Now help me out and set the table, our friends are hungry. Daphne pulled away and returned to the kitchen to finish preparing the meal. Harry simply watched her, and then watched his friends bantering back and forth. They had all changed so much over the year, and then again, not a bit. He always looked forward to these gatherings, ever since he and Daphne had left England right after their wedding. They had done everything they had talked about during school, and Harry had never been happier. Especially when he thought about what still lay ahead for them. With his first child on the way, Harry knew that this was one adventure he was more than prepared for, and with his friends' help, no, his family's help. There was nothing that he and his beautiful wife couldn't handle. He had at last found the happiness he'd dreamt of all his life, here among those he loved. Finite. Please like and subscribe.